I'm looking at a digital image. If I didn't know what it was, I wouldn't be able to tell. It reminds me of a Rorschach inkblot test, but in color. There's grayish blue along the top that forms a wide, stretched out upside down V shape. Below it, you can see whitish and mid-gray lines going in different directions. One of those lines goes from the top and moves downward, then curves and goes straight, eventually turning upwards again like a stretched out letter U. Inside of it are splotches of dark and medium gray and green. It's blurry and out of focus. There are several bright white spots of varying sizes scattered amongst it that are blurred. It's a satellite image taken from miles above that shows the Gavins Point Dam, the Crofton Lakeview Golf Course, and the surrounding area. To the average person, it doesn't evoke any emotion, but for me, it causes a strange feeling in my stomach and makes my neck shiver and feel like the hair is standing on end. It was taken on September 20th, 1992, and although it's too blurry to see much of anything, Tammy is there, in the ravine, and she's waiting to be found. This is Footsteps in the Dark, Season 1, Tammy Haas, Episode 3. If you want to see the pursuit for truth in Tammy's case continue, please consider supporting us. You can do this in a number of different ways. First, you can join our Patreon site. This is where you'll find all of the in-depth analysis that went into our conclusions and lots of behind-the-scenes information. You can support us by buying merchandise, or you can donate. All of these options can be found on our website at footstepsinthedarkpodcast.com. And if you like the song by John Slap Myers, Tammy's Ghost, that we use at the end of each episode as a prelude to the next, please download it. It's just 99 cents and you can find it on iTunes. And as always, we thank you for your support. It really does mean everything to us. On the morning of Wednesday, September 23rd, 1992, a golfer looking for golf balls would find Tammy, and a high school student on her way to school would stop to help. This is Rick Kupta and Dwan Beardmore.
I worked at that time it was called Max, and I'm still employed at the same place. It's called Sapa now, but back then it was Max, and I worked not directly, but different department. There was a guy named Brad Haas, and we were down at the Walnut Tavern a few days before I found her. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned, we're sitting at the bar having a beer, and he mentioned that was it his niece or his cousin? I can't remember which. It's Brad Haas, but was missing. And so didn't know Tammy, or at the time didn't know anything about her. He just said something about it, casual talking at the bar. And so what was it? I don't remember the day I found her, but I got off work because I was working night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that day I decided to go hunt golf balls. It's something I've done in the past, but it was, instead of going and having a few drinks with the guys, I decided I was going to go hunt golf balls. And at that time, I belonged to Crofton Golf Course, so that's where I went. And because I kind of knew where, when people hit the ball astray, where they'd kind of be. And that particular hole they actually closed it a few years after I found Tammy, but there was a hole right along the road there. I'm not even sure of the name of. You know where she was? Right?
Yeah, I've been there. It's right off of 121 there.
Yep, 121. Yeah. So a lot of guys would play that as a par 3 going down the hill there, and they would hit the road, and it would bounce across the road. I've done it myself many, many times. In fact, I golfed against Sheriff Dave Hunna at the time, and because I was asked that question, why did you go there? And I said, Dave, I said, I've golfed against you here many times, and you know that you slice it all, you're going to hit the road, and that's why they took the hole out, because you're hitting into traffic, and if you slice, and you could hit an oncoming car real easily. And but I went down there and I started finding golf balls, and just kept going along, and I seen a girl, looked like a girl. Oh, Jesus, it's been a long time. I forgot what I was going to say, but she was hunched over like a log or something like that, and one hand was downhill and it was blue, and I called out to her several times, and she didn't respond, and so I think I went down quite a bit closer, and I seen that she wasn't moving. Her hand was blue, and something, I don't know if I was told that or something, but I figured she was already gone. This girl was gone, and I needed to go get help. So it's pretty steep there. You've been there, right?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So I got up the hill, and I decided the first thing I was just going to flag the first vehicle down, because I was parked. You're probably not familiar with the course much at all, but there's to the east, there's kind of east of hole number 9, but there's I think the Game Fish Parks owns some property right there. But I was parked up there quite a ways around the corner. If you're from where she was found, the east around the corner back to the north. I don't know, is that
that kind of makes sense, yeah.
Okay. So that's where I parked up there, and that was one of my favorite places to find golf balls, actually. And then I worked my way all the way down there, and I just parked there and just planned on walking the whole course. But anyways, I'm going up the hill, and I flagged the first car down, and it's a young high school girl.
Well, it was just, I seen him, standing alongside the road. I pulled over, and the words out of his mouth is, you said, I think I just found the girl's body that's been missing from Yankton.
And I asked her for a ride to my vehicle or to get help. Can't remember which. Right now, I actually can't remember.
And I was like, what? That's not what you're expecting. You're expecting, like, hey, my car broke down, something like that. And I don't remember exactly what happened, like, right after that, but then I know there was another kid from my school that pulled up behind us as well. And then he got out because Rick went back and talked to him. He got out, and then I got out because then it was I felt safe, that it wasn't, some kind of crazy guy trying to get me. And so we got out of the car.
And she says, well, why? And I told her that I just found a body and that we need to call the police and we need to get hold of authorities. And her first thing out of her mouth, because this is something I'll never forget, was, is it Tammy? And I said, I have no idea who it is. I said, I don't know any Tammys or anything like that. And she said, can I see her? And I'm like, I just remember being frustrated that she wouldn't just give me a ride. But anyways, I said, yeah, let's look down the hill. And she grabbed one of my arms and put a death grip on it as we were walking down that hill. And
we stepped up, there was a guardrail there, and we stepped over the guardrail, and instantly saw her body laying there. And I remember kind of losing my step a little bit, that Rick actually kind of grabbed me and held me up because, otherwise I would have tumbled probably right down on top of her.
And I remember she let go of my hand or my arm, and I'm looking at Tammy, and I look over to look at this girl's reaction, and she was running back up the hill. She hopped in her car or vehicle or whatever it was, and she took off. And holy cow. But later on, a detective told me that put yourself in her shoes, she don't know if you're the killer or something like that, and she's probably scared at that point. I said, well, I guess that makes sense. And because she's, young girl on her way to school.
It wouldn't take long for the discovery of Tammy's body to become news, and by mid-morning, administrators at Yankton High School had become aware. Assistant Principal Wallace Botch was familiar with Eric as he'd served detention in his office many times for his propensity for tardiness, and decided that he would pull Eric from class and tell him the news personally, part of their crisis management protocol. Once told, Eric hugged him and thanked him for telling him, then ran to his locker and out of the building. According to an early interview, Eric told his friend Jason that he threw himself on the ground and wished a car would run over and kill him. Eric would go home and spend most of his time in his room, while several friends and classmates would visit, with just a few of them interacting directly with him. Meanwhile, Tammy's body had been visually examined and photographed at the scene. She was found at the very bottom of a 40-foot ravine, just off of Highway 121 near the Crofton Lakeview Golf Course. She was laying partly on her side, but with the front of her body towards the ground. Her light-colored pants were all the way down, and her right foot was out of the pant leg, and her underwear was up and in its normal position. Her purse and shoes were found several feet away and were dispersed apart from one another, causing law enforcement to believe they were likely thrown from the roadside into the ravine. In addition, she had a small hole in her left cheek that looked like a small caliber bullet hole. Given the appearance of her clothing and location of the other items and the hole in her cheek, law enforcement would soon begin to operate under the assumption that her death was a homicide. While awaiting autopsy results, authorities were tasked with finding people and interviewing them. Since Eric was the last known to be with her, he was interviewed almost immediately, but before autopsy results were finalized. Thus, law enforcement continued to believe that she'd been shot. This led to a notable moment when Eric was interviewed by Sheriff's Deputy Shane Topel.
So, Tammy was declared missing. She'd been missing, I think it was 2 weeks or so, and I learned that already a missing persons report had come in, and Officer Richley Orth of the Yankton Police Department had gone out and interviewed a number of her friends because the report came in that she was missing out of Yankton, so the PD had it. That Sunday night, so that would have been, I can't tell you, the end of getting towards the end of September. But that Sunday evening, one of Tammy's friends, Ellie Tapkin, came into the sheriff's office with her father, who was a judge, and he walked into my office, and I happened to be working a Sunday evening, and he walked into my office and laid a list of people that I was to interview regarding this, as he put it, this missing girl. And, it had her name at the top of it, and it had a list of friends. And so I contacted the PD to say, hey, what the hell is this about? And then found out that Richley had handled it and had spoken to a number of people. So the first person to speak to Eric would have been Richley. And then she and I that night went out and got a hold of the other friends. We were unable to get a hold of Eric. But at that point, she was still just a missing person. I had Monday off, and on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning, whichever day I went back to work. I used to live out by the lake, and our radios used to be just terrible, and I couldn't generally pick up a lot of city police traffic or anything like that. Well, when I turned my radio on, boy, it was just crystal clear. All the the police traffic and things like that. And so we, I drove into the office, and when I got in there, I said to one of my coworkers, "Hey, what the hell is the city got units out at the lake for?" And Dixie Bartlett was the officer I was working with that day, and Dixie said, they found that Haas girl. And I said, "Found her? Where?" "Well, in the ravine near the golf course in Nebraska." It's like, holy shit. Okay. Well, that afternoon then, we had FBI agents because it was over state lines and she'd been reported missing in South Dakota. We had Nebraska State Patrol, and we probably had 30, 35 cops all jammed in one room trying to put together a task force as to how we were going to, go out and interview people. Well, we went out and interviewed people, and as we conducted the interview, of course they ordered autopsies and an autopsy, and anyhow, then just by luck of the draw, and they paired up FBI agents with local law enforcement so that we could get them around the area. And by luck of the draw, Drew McConaughey and I ended up talking with Eric. And so we're talking probably 2 weeks after the death, and less than 12 hours after her body was found. And at that point, there was rumors going around the town, which I believe were extremely detrimental to the investigation. But in any event, the rumors that were going around the town were, everything from, some stranger abduction to, pointing the finger at her boyfriend. And initially, there was confusion as to who the boyfriend was. They thought it was another young man, and that kind of, for probably 15 or 20 minutes, sent us going in one direction that we pretty quickly were able to figure out wasn't the right direction. And then we ended up going back to potential, not just Eric, but were there other guys that may have been involved, and I mean, were there other guys that she had dated, things like that. And so so we had dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews to complete. Well, when Drew and I spoke to Eric, his dad came with him, and we talked to him in the basement of the safety stern, and we went through everything, and the kind of oh wow moment was all through the interview. He was very yeah, we did this, went to my house, that was pretty much the gist of it. And I mean, frankly, I would have to review the reports, to tell you specifics about it. But the oh wow moment of it for me was she had a small hole in her face when she was found, on her cheek. And everybody, given the nature of where the body was and how the body was, you treat every death like it's a homicide until you can prove that it's not. Every unattended death. And anyhow, in this case, with that hole in the cheek, the thought at the time was that this may have been a bullet wound. And so as we're conducting the interview, Drew asked if Eric owned a 22. And I think he just called it a 22. And Eric looked up and he goes, "A 22? What's that?" And I remember him becoming fairly animated as he said it. And Drew said, "Well, it's a 22 rifle." And Eric goes, "A gun?" "No, I don't have a gun." And I didn't catch it at the time, and I was too new of an officer to have caught it. But had I a little more experience, I probably would have caught the fact that he knew she wasn't killed by a gun. And, that was, the way I interpreted how he responded to that was that, that he, had no idea why we would have even asked that question.
Unknown to investigators, the hole wasn't caused by a bullet, but by a bug burrowing while she was in the ravine. Eric's surprised reaction was telling in that he seemed to know before investigators that she wasn't shot. The real cause of death would not be known until the autopsy was complete, and unknown to investigators in the moment, that would take more time than anticipated. It would take 2 autopsies to determine Tammy's cause of death. To escape the commotion, Eric and 2 friends, Dusty and Jason, would head 2 hours west to a family cabin near Gregory, South Dakota. By some accounts, it was thought the real purpose was to secretly meet with a family attorney. However, I've never been able to corroborate that. And phone records from the Stuckel household show that the first call to the firm of Johnson, Eklund, and Gregory took place on September 26th, 3 days after Tammy was found, and a total of 5 calls were made between the 26th and October 3rd. It appears that consulting with an attorney didn't happen until 3 days after Tammy was found. Eric's getaway to the family cabin would consist of steaks, beer, and 4-wheeling. According to an interview with Eric's friend Dusty in October, Dusty would tell investigators that they went there to get away from everything, have a steak, and drink some beer. I asked Eric's close friend Jason, who was also with him, about this trip.
What another thing that a lot of people seems like they hedge on a lot is the Gregory trip.
Yeah. I mean, even the last time I talked to he's in my sister's wedding too. I can't remember his name. He was bringing that up. Ever been to the cabin? No, you haven't. They thought we went and talked to some attorney up there. It's like, you fucking kidding? I went to Gregory to talk to an attorney because that's their criminal fucking mastermind that 17 do, I went to the cabin just to get away, Because, I mean, shit. Yeah, heck was, fucking wrecked, Dusty and I were like, fuck, we'll go to the cabin, hang out, just relax. Let shit sink in a little bit, I don't know.
Meanwhile, while Eric was escaping reality at the cabin, investigators were getting organized trying to obtain useful leads, and friends and family were learning that Tammy was gone. Here's Tammy's friend, Marjo.
I know that there was a rumor going around like the night before that they had found a body. And then I had also heard the rumor the next morning because I remember on campus, since USD is so close to Yankton, there was a lot of, obviously, Yankton people that went to USD. And I remember them saying, hey, I heard they found a body. And I was just like, it doesn't mean it's Tammy, and we just have to hold on hope that it's not Tammy, because nothing had been confirmed by then, at least to me. And then by the time I was walking across campus, a couple of sorority sisters said to me, your parents are at the sorority house, and then I knew for sure that was her body.
When a body is found under suspicious circumstances, an autopsy is performed. The purpose is to discover how someone died, and what medical examiners find is used to help understand what could or could not have happened to someone. When a death leads to a criminal arrest, the autopsy serves as the foundation for understanding what happened to a victim and when, and can become the central basis of evidence in a trial. If done properly, autopsy findings can bring clarity from the fog. If done poorly, it can leave the door open for exoneration by a quality defense team. Early on with this case, certain elements of the autopsy became known to the media. In this case, the conclusion was that Tammy died from hyperflexation of the neck, resulting in separation of the C1, C2 vertebrae. Technical and boring, it made more sense to dumb that down to something simple that most could understand. And this became a broken neck, as heard in this news report.
Yesterday, almost 3 years to the date that the body of Tammy Haas was found in a ditch, her neck broken, Eric Stuckel.
And as I interviewed many of Tammy's friends, it became clear that this is what they still thought as well. As I began digging into this case, I realized that only tidbits of her autopsy findings had ever made it into the public realm, and, as a result, people have developed countless speculations based upon their understanding of her injuries. Given my background in human anatomy, injury biomechanics, and physics, I knew I needed to try and locate a copy of the autopsy report, and had a feeling there was more to her injuries than just the neck injury. After a few months of digging, I was able to locate copies of the original autopsy reports. The majority of this episode will discuss never-before-known details of the autopsy and related matters associated with the theories of how she died. Early in the investigation, various law enforcement officers thought she'd been car surfing and fell off the car into the ravine based upon the close proximity to the highway. This theory had some basis. Within weeks of her discovery in the ravine, investigators had interviewed several dozen teenagers who had been at the party at the Stevenson farm that night she disappeared, and car surfing was an early rumor found in these reports. However, other theories would emerge. Another was that since she'd been to a party close by and law enforcement found an open window at the farmhouse, some speculated that she had fallen from a second-story window, and since partygoers were afraid of getting in trouble for drinking and using drugs, they covered up her death. Some felt that her boyfriend, Eric Stuckel, killed her after getting into an argument. Others felt that she was abducted while walking home and was raped, killed, and thrown into the ravine. Many theories weave together elements of these, resulting in hybrid speculations. Yet, there are just two prevailing elements that serve as a foundation for most all of the theories: that she fell, or that someone killed her by attacking her, breaking her neck. In this episode, we're going to discuss her autopsy in great detail. The purpose of this is to provide a better understanding about what scenarios are likely, and which are unlikely or impossible. Listeners should be aware that we will be discussing very mature details, and some of you may find this graphic and disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. On the day she was found, her body was sent to Sioux Falls for an autopsy performed by Dr. Brad Randall, and at about 5 p.m., it began. However, Dr. Randall was unable to determine a cause of death and suspected her toxicology results would answer that question. Yet law enforcement had other ideas and sent her body to Sioux City for a second autopsy performed by Dr. Thomas Bennett the next day. It's here where he would take x-rays, and it was discovered that Tammy had suffered a neck injury. Officially, her cause of death was listed as hyperflexion injury. In other words, her head was forcibly flexed towards her chest. No other injuries found contributed to her death. However, several other injuries were noted. Since I did not have pictures to compare to the descriptions, I tried reaching out to both Dr. Randall and Dr. Bennett. I was able to reach both Dr. Randall and Dr. Bennett, and both agreed to speak with me, until they found out I was inquiring about Tammy's case. At that time, both declined to comment for unknown reasons. However, it is not uncommon for pathologists to decline to comment, especially on cases that are considered open for fear of legal repercussions, and the FBI and Yankton Police Department still consider this an open case. That said, I can understand why both doctors decided to remain silent. The beginning of an autopsy typically begins with the external assessment of the body, followed by an internal assessment. When the first examination began, her hands and feet were bagged to preserve evidence. Her pants had been pulled up to thigh level, underwear in its normal position, and the remainder of her clothing, bra, shirt, and jacket, were found to be in a normal position. These items were carefully removed and collected for analysis. In addition, personal effects were collected, and these consisted of a black leather necklace, a gold chain necklace, pearl and gold earrings from the left ear, silver circle-type earring from the right ear, 4 rings, 2 from each hand. At this point, visual inspection of her body began, and several superficial injuries were noted. On her calf, below the knee and 12 inches above the bottom of her foot, there was a 5 to 6 inch long linear abrasion, wider towards the knee and tapering into a point towards the mid-calf, which kind of looks like a stretched out triangle, with the widest point higher up, with the uppermost part more towards the inner calf, and it thins and tapers towards the middle as it tapers down towards the outer portion of the calf. On the right lower back and buttock area, there are 2 near square-like abrasions, the dimensions of which were not noted in the autopsy report, but appear to be around 6 inches across. The abrasion on the buttock appears to have an angle to the scrape going from right to left, top to bottom, similar to the calf injury, while the higher abrasion in the lower back is more vertical. It should be noted that the short distance between the 2 abrasions was where the panty line was, indicating that her underwear was up and in a normal position at the time of injury. At the left upper neck, there was, quote, a mid-occipital crusted brown 1/2 inch abrasion and a series of faint brown discolorations over the left neck region beginning at the base of the skull and extending towards the left upper shoulder." End quote. The discolored areas were surrounded by decomposed skin and measured 2.5 inches by about 1/2 inch. This injury is likely what resulted in the fatal neck injury by forcing her head down. However, and strangely, this impact mark was not drawn in on Dr. Bennett's autopsy diagram, though the others had been. He makes no mention of the marks during his autopsy, and our only source for them is Dr. Randall's verbal description in his report from the first autopsy. There was a small abrasion on the back of the right hand, mild abrasions on the left hand and wrist, and scattered small light abrasions in the lower back area. The right lateral thigh had 3 thin linear abrasions that were almost vertical, with a slight anterior to posterior direction. The length, width, and distance between them was not noted in the report. While there were several other areas noted of visible change to the body, these were considered to be changes that occurred after she was placed in the ravine. Due to their graphic nature, they will not be discussed in detail. Dr. Bennett obtained x-rays and noted that the upper 2 neck vertebrae were separated by an abnormally large distance, and he suspected ligament damage. He dissected this area and found torn ligaments in the upper neck, with an acute hemorrhage into the soft tissues. During the first autopsy, Dr. Randall discovered a small 2-centimeter contusion deep in the abdomen near the spine, in the proximal mesentery near the jejunum, a part of the small intestine. However, no bruising or marks were noticed on her abdomen, and for that matter, no bruising was noticed anywhere externally, just scrapes ranging from light scratches to what one would refer to as road rash. Examination of her brain and organs was normal. Fingernail clippings were taken and sent to be processed. Her head was shaved and her hair was kept for forensic analysis. There were no broken bones, no external bruises, and nothing that could be deemed conclusively as defensive injuries. A couple of old scars were noted, and there was extensive damage to areas of her body from insects that occurred after death. The only other relevant finding was that Dr. Randall noted that the bottoms of her feet were lightly soiled, possibly indicating that she'd been barefoot outside at some point in time that evening. All of her jewelry was intact, necklace, rings, and earrings. Her purse was found at the scene, and nothing was missing. In other words, robbery could easily be ruled out as a motive in her death. Lastly, sometime after being placed in the ravine, her stomach contents were purged after death, resulting in partially digested food being found on her mouth and shirt. In addition, 20 cc's of gastric contents were discovered in her stomach with small, noodle-like food intermixed with a reddish fluid, and no food was found in her small intestine. Her last known meal was spaghetti from Pizza Hut, and a receipt showed that they paid for their meal at 6:35 p.m. According to Dr. Bennett, the presence of partially undigested food acted as a clock, and that the maximum allowable time that Tammy was alive after the 6:35 p.m. meal was 6 hours, meaning the latest time of death possible was 12:35 a.m. on September 18, 1992. This is a finding that I've heard before in other cases. However, I wanted to dig into this a bit further and see if this was true, or whether this was medical dogma. In other words, something that's repeated so often that it's thought to be fact, but isn't. This led me to an October 2017 study from the IOSR Journal of Dental and Medical Sciences titled Digestive Status of Stomach Contents, an Indicator of Time Since Death. The article discusses 507 cases of death where the timing of the decedent's last meal was known and involved examination of the stomach contents. The primary factors being considered involved gastric emptying and the degree of digestion of the food. Regarding gastric emptying, individuals were examined and categorized as no gastric emptying, meaning the stomach was full, partial gastric emptying, meaning some of the contents had left the stomach, or complete gastric emptying, meaning the food had finished emptying from the stomach into the small intestine. Pertaining to digestion, each decedent was examined and categorized by recognizability of the food contents. Either it was or it wasn't. In Tammy's case, the food contents were largely unrecognizable, except for small particles, and could be discerned as noodle-like, meaning there was just enough there to determine it was some kind of noodle, but not enough to determine which kind. And while 20 cc's was found remaining in her stomach, none was found in the small intestine until the furthest portion away from the stomach, the distal ileum, where some thick liquid was found, further indicating she had a full stomach when she died. According to the study, while 59% of females had food in the stomach beyond 6 hours after death, only 7 out of 105 had a full stomach, and out of the 7, just one had a full stomach beyond 6 hours after death. And while the study did show that head trauma can halt digestion, Tammy's injuries would have led to paralysis and the loss of the ability to breathe, leading to hypoxia and death in about 3 minutes. Thus, any trauma sustained in her injuries would not have affected the rate of digestion or gastric motility. The only factor that may call this maximum 6-hour digestive window into question is alcohol. Alcohol can slow digestive time. Tammy's blood alcohol concentration at the time of death was 0.08, which is what we now consider to be intoxicated. However, the evidence suggests that she had not started drinking until 3.5 hours after eating, and it would take 30 minutes to an hour for blood alcohol levels to appreciably elevate, and thus would play only a minimal role regarding a 6-hour digestive process. Based on this research, this does put the latest probable time of Tammy's death at 12:35 a.m. on September 18, 1992. Since Tammy had been lying in a ravine for 6 days, several states of decomposition that could normally help determine the time of death were no longer possible, such as rigor mortis and body temperature. However, livor mortis, the discoloration of the skin from the pooling of blood that occurs after the heart stops, tends to set within 20 to 30 minutes and is set before color changes to the skin are visible. Since the pattern of livor mortis was consistent with her position when found, we can conclude that she was placed in the ravine within a short time after death occurred, likely within 20 to 30 minutes. Thus, Tammy would have to have been placed in the ravine no later than 1:05 a.m. on September 18, 1992. Tammy's body didn't have the typical kinds of bruises and markings one would associate with having been attacked or beaten. The lack of fractures to bone or bruises to skin or muscle anywhere makes the likelihood of car surfing or being hit by a car as a pedestrian nearly impossible. This, combined with a lack of forced penetration, fingernail evidence, or semen on her underwear, makes considering an abduction, beating, and rape almost impossible. Lack of a concussion, subdural hemorrhage, skull fracture, or significant bruising to the scalp makes being hit in the head by things such as tire irons, a block of wood, or a rock very unlikely. The lack of particulate debris such as sand or small pebbles and dirt in the scrapes of her leg and back make dirty, rocky, or sandy surfaces like roads, or a fall from a window onto shingles, highly suspect. The strange nature of Tammy's injuries left investigators stymied, while citizens, family, and friends were left to try and piece it together to make sense of it, hence the many theories that still circulate today. When I was initially reviewing testimony from the medical examiners and read about the abrasions, the first thing that came to my mind was that she fell backwards against something, since every visible abrasion was on her backside. If she were hit by something, one would expect most of the injuries to be clustered together. However, in Tammy's case, there's a calf abrasion and then nothing for over 2 feet, then abrasions on the opposite side, then nothing for over 2 feet, and a small abrasion near the back of her head. Twice I've known people that fell back and hit something, resulting in a fracture to the upper neck. One lived, the other died several days later. Could it be possible that Tammy fell backwards into something, accidentally, that caused the scrapes and the neck injury? Was it possible that she was hit or pushed backwards by someone and she fell and hit something? In my mind, these were the top 2 possibilities based upon her injuries. But one injury just didn't make sense. The contusion to the proximal mesentery near the jejunum. Mesentery and jejunum, these aren't words spoken around most dinner tables, and so we must take a moment to better understand what the words mean. The jejunum is the middle part of the small intestine. When food passes from the stomach, it first goes into the duodenum, which is the first 7 to 8 feet of the small intestine. The next 7 to 8 feet or so is the jejunum, the middle part of the small intestine, and typically is found in the upper left quadrant of the abdomen. The mesentery is a broad tissue that starts in the front of the lower back and fans out attaching to the small intestine, and it anchors the small intestine to the abdominal wall, so the small intestine doesn't fall into the pelvis. It contains blood vessels, nerves that supply the small intestine, as well as having lymphatic tissue and helps store fat. It is a highly resilient tissue that can wiggle and move to withstand impact. But some areas, particularly near the proximal jejunum, are tethered to other structures that prevents them from being able to move out of the way, and thus are more likely to become damaged. It is here that Dr. Randall discovered a small 2-centimeter round contusion, or slightly less than 1 inch, indicating that either something hit her or she hit something hard enough to cause a small bruise. Dr. Randall felt that it had to be something of size, and was smooth in order to prevent leaving a mark on her abdomen, but he was not able to say what. This area of the mesentery is one of the most common areas injured due to its close proximity to the ligament of Treats, an area where the bowel is in a more fixed position and cannot move away from impact as easily, so it gets trapped between the spine and pelvis and whatever has impacted the bowel. Such injuries are not usually serious and only represent about 5% of abdominal injuries that end up in the ER. Of that 5%, however, 62% of those injuries are due to car accidents where someone hits something like the steering wheel. Most other reasons involve some kind of blunt trauma to the abdomen. In combination with the severe neck sprain, think whiplash, rumors such as a car accident began early and still persist. However, there's no indication that she was driving that night. She was Eric's passenger. And Eric's car, when impounded a week later, showed no signs of serious collision, just surface scrapes and rubs. As a passenger, she would have had to have had a seatbelt across her abdomen to receive that injury, and that usually leaves a mark that doctors refer to as a seatbelt sign, something she didn't have. A car accident doesn't explain the pattern of injuries to her lower leg, lower back, or neck, or how she'd have a scrape on the back of her left leg without any damage to her jeans, which strongly indicates that her jeans were down or off of her leg at the time of injury. This is also why a fall from a window at the party doesn't make much sense either, and a fall from a window would have resulted in bruising that didn't exist. To say the least, the pattern of injuries is easily confusing and ambiguous, and why law enforcement struggled. In most of our minds, when we think of a blunt force injury to the abdomen and a broken neck, we instantly believe the person was beaten and killed. And that may be why so many people still feel that's what happened. Yet, her neck wasn't broken, it was sprained, much like the difference between a broken ankle and a sprained one. This subtle shift in words results in an impactful difference in our minds. As I read through the autopsy reports and medical testimony, the image that I had in my mind was that she fell backwards against something, hit her leg, lower back, and head. And the key to all this wasn't the neck injury, it was the abdominal injury. Did she fall onto something, or did something or someone hit her with something that caused her to fall? Either seemed possible, and two possibilities remained: that it was accidental, or that someone intentionally hit her and she fell backwards. What we do know is that since it bled resulting in the bruise, it happened before death, as bruising requires a heartbeat to push blood through the broken capillaries. And the simplest explanation would be that they all occurred during the same event. What caused the square-like, clean abrasions to the lower back and buttock area? Common sense would tell us that it would have to have a relatively flat edge in order to make a square abrasion, and it most likely could not be a road. We've all fallen on a bike or slid into a base on a field and ended up with road rash, but those injuries are almost always round or ovoid in shape. These were distinctly square-like, and according to Dr. Randall, who first examined them, they were clean, meaning that the surface she hit was clean too. Further, the lowest of the two was lower than where the waistline would have been, yet there was no damage to the pants, further indicating that her pants were down, or at least partially down when injured. In addition, Dr. Randall noted something that I initially read and dismissed, but is also very important. The scrapes on her lower back and hip were unabraded, meaning that the surface of what she hit had some kind of edge to it that cut, instead of a rough surface that rubbed or scraped. Think of it like this. If you take a rough surface, like sandpaper, and rub it across something soft, like clay, you can see the lines of the sandpaper grit. This leaves little edges around the scrape, and areas in the scrape that are either deeper or more superficial. But these wounds didn't have anything like that, which rules out rough surfaces like roads and shingles, or things like bark on trees. As I began going through the medical evidence, it became clear that an accident was just as possible as someone having pushed, kicked, or punched her. However, like the 6 agencies involved in investigating this case, that's where things hit a wall. They didn't know what happened, why it happened, where it happened, or how it happened. 2 days after Tammy was found, Eric Stuckel was interviewed by Bill Miller and Sheriff Dave Hunoff. During the interview, Detective Bill Miller decided to break the monotony and try a new technique he had learned, and he asked Eric to write down anything he couldn't say. A technique that can help anxiety-ridden teenagers get out what they feel they need to say, which Eric did, and it was forwarded for content analysis, and we'll discuss this in later episodes. Eric was taken to the ravine where Tammy was found, After arriving and parking to the west of the ravine, Eric Stuckel got out of the car along with Sheriff Hunoff and Detective Bill Miller and began walking. With Eric in front, they began walking down the road towards the ravine on the south side of the road. There's a guardrail made of 3 thick steel cables that run the length of the ravine, approximately 628 feet, and at about the 180-foot mark from the west end, Eric stopped and turned quickly. And this caught the watchful eye of Detective Bill Miller, because Eric turned at exactly the right spot on the road above where Tammy's body was found. This alarmed Miller, because he cannot see where Tammy's body had been from the road, and both Bill Miller and Sheriff Hunoff were taller than Eric. Miller turned to ask Eric how he knew where Tammy's body was found. Eric replied, "I could see the grass." Miller responded, "Bullshit. There's no grass matted down up here." Eric replied, "Then I just knew." On the same day, Eric's car was impounded, and Eric would be asked to take a voluntary polygraph test administered by DCI agent Fred Devaney at the Public Safety Building in Yankton. According to the polygraph examination report, dated October 2nd, 1992, Eric was asked, quote, "Did you kill Tammy Haas?" His answer, "No." Regarding the death of Tammy Haas, were you present when she died? His answer, "No." Devaney's conclusions read, quote, "After careful evaluation, it is the opinion of this examiner that the charge resulting from this examination reveals significant criteria that would indicate deception on the part of Eric Stuckel in answering the above-mentioned questions. It should also be noted that there is significant deception indicated in the systematic outside questions also. Unfortunately, the report does not indicate which other questions showed deception. On Monday, September 30th, 1992, Tammy would be laid to rest. The closed casket funeral was attended by hundreds of friends and family wishing to pay their respects to a young woman whose life was tragically cut short. Eric Stuckel would attend, and in a moment of silence, he placed a strange triangular-shaped stone on her casket, the meaning of which remains unknown. With Eric clearly in the crosshairs, law enforcement would begin to assemble its task force and begin to try to unravel what happened to Tammy. As the investigation of Eric began to ramp up, on the next episode of Footsteps in the Dark. Although Tammy's case has grown cold, that doesn't mean that it's closed. The FBI and Yankton Police Department continue to seek information in the death of Tammy Haas. If you have information, you have options. Call the FBI's Sioux Falls Resident Agency at 605-334-6881, the Yankton Police Department at 605-668-5210, submit a tip at tips.fbi.gov, or lastly, send us a message. Someone knows what happened to Tammy, and maybe you know how to help solve the mystery.
God. It makes me, you have to understand, like, I get that I was Tammy's ex-boyfriend. I get that I was a suspect. I get that. Like, there's no reason why I shouldn't have been a suspect. I was an ex-boyfriend. But, like, even when the FBI came to talk to me at work that day, I willingly went with them to the federal building, and they hooked me up to a lie detector test, and, I was treated so badly. I thought, like, they're going to pin this on me and I'm going to jail forever, you know?
Yeah, no, yeah, when I was working down in Omaha, First Data Resources, and, yeah, the 2 stadies from Nebraska came down and gave me the working over, but, yeah, with the Polaroid book, you know, that's something that I can't ever erase. I wish I could. You know, that's a bad one. Little good cop, bad cop.
Some say that due to the public push of this, the Pulse Group, suddenly in September of 95, within days of Eric Stuckel's birthday, and the 3-year anniversary, really. The 3-year anniversary was the key date, and they made a big deal of that. Of course, the defense did in the trial. But anyway, an arrest was made of Eric Stuckel.
Honest to God, that guy, that Cruz, he's dangerous. He's always been. I think he's been in the pen. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But he's out just willy-nillying around. And I have heard more than from one person that they are convinced that he was the one that did it. And then put it on Eric to help him take care of the problem. I don't know if that's true or not. But, you know, Cruz was one of those guys. He was a druggie. He was the guy that if you needed pot or something, that's who you'd go to. He was scary. And he would be the type of person that would do something like that. I don't know. It just kind of makes you wonder, you know, why didn't he get more questioning done?
And Mike came up from behind me and he grabbed me and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going home." And he said, "Why?" And I said, This isn't my type of party."
All of you have been trying to say that for 30 years.
Yeah.
This podcast was written and produced by me, your host, Chad Zimmerman. The song featured in the trailer, Tammy's Ghost, was written and features John Sapp on vocals, guitar, and bass, Matt Gedney on guitar, Adam Jones on drums, and Laura Egan and Carl Graber on horns.